Well, let's turn in your Bibles to Habakkuk, actually we're going to be in chapter 1 just at the start here. And we've been studying Habakkuk and his complaints to God. And reading this, I'm sort of glad that my thoughts have not always been recorded, like Habakkuk's thoughts were. And he complains to God about the sin of his own people and really says, Lord, you need to do something about this. So God responds, and Habakkuk's not so convinced that this is how God actually works. And so before he gets ready to deliver the Lord's message that the Lord gave him to the people, he wants to get a few things straight. And interesting that God has already told Habakkuk what he's going to do, but it appears to Habakkuk that somehow God is not just or fair or even good. So he complains, and we read this passage, but we're just going to read from verse 12 to 17 before we start tonight. Are you not from everlasting, O Yahweh, or O Lord my God, my Holy One? We will not die. You, O Yahweh, have placed them to judge, and you, O Rock, have established them to reprove. And he's reminding God here, I think, that there's no need to go overboard here, Lord. This is just a discipline on our people after hearing what God was going to do. Your eyes are too pure to see evil, and you cannot look on trouble. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than thee? Talking about Babylon over Judah. And you have made men like the fish of the sea, like creeping things without a ruler over them. The Chaldeans or Babylonians bring all of them up with a hook, drag them away with their net, and gather them together in their fishing net. Therefore they are glad and rejoice. Therefore they offer a sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their fishing net. Because through these things their portion is rich and their food is fat. Will they therefore empty their net and continually kill nations without sparing? And then verse 1. So I will stand on my guard post and station myself on the fortification. And I will keep watch to see what he will speak to me and how I may respond when I am reproved. So what a response here by Habakkuk. I will wait and see, Lord, what you're going to say. You know, I thought of the benefit of the wisdom, isn't it, in listening to what God says with such anticipation, which, to Habakkuk's credit here, he is anticipating here how God is going to respond, to be able to look up and search diligently of what God is going to say, and the wisdom here of listening to God and his word. And you have to ask the question, well, why? Well, God knows everything, doesn't he? He rules, he commands everything. To have the attitude that I need to listen to God today so that I might do what is right, and I know what is right, so that I might have the proper attitude and actions. So he says, I will stand on my guard post. I will place myself in a position to hear from God. This means, I think, that we need to be people who sit near the front of the church, right? Mm-hmm. I need to be in a position to hear from God. Rick Baker, former pastor, always taught the importance of being in church every Sunday. He said, because sometimes God may only say something once, and I need to be there to hear it. Never forgot that. And there can be a fine line, I think, between a strong commitment and being that legalistic commitment. I never miss a Sunday, you know. And but, you know, there's great importance of never missing a Sunday. To have that commitment that I need to be in church with the people of God is so important. I also remember Rick always saying that Sundays is a day that we continually readjust and reaffirm our thinking. Sometimes we come and our thinking is off and we need to readjust it. But sometimes our thinking is right on and we need to reaffirm it. And just some great thoughts there by him. Imagine if you were starting a new job, or you had just purchased something that you need to understand how it works. You need to read and discover how to use this new tool or whatever it is. And in fact, I would just give the instructions to Anne, and that's no lie. And Anne would have it all simply laid out for me. There's Mark, this is what you need to do. And but if we need to learn how to do something well, it's not unlike us to be careful, isn't it, to listen and to find out. This is the same kind of attentive thought we need for God, whether at home or here at church, to listen carefully to what God is saying. And this is not just for us. This is for others too. It's for the betterment of others. I was talking with a gentleman at a recent funeral I was at People's, and you would know him, many of you. And he said to me, and he's a good communicator, especially one-on-one with people, not so much for standing up teaching. And we got talking about ministering to those who their theology may be more simplistic. They just don't know as much, maybe a newer Christian, or they may not consider themselves a studier and thrive at other ministries, maybe things that maybe don't involve direct teaching, and they're just not, it's just not on their radar as much as it is maybe with some. But he said to me, he said, Mark, that still gives me the need to deepen my own understanding of God and my theology of God, because even when I'm ministering to someone who may not have as deep a faith, it is my deep faith that's necessary to minister to them well. That is so true. And he's not saying this arrogantly. If you know him, he's not an arrogant statement at all. But it's true. Whether we're ministering to someone who is a great Bible studier, or we're ministering to somebody that just does a pile of ministry within the church that maybe doesn't always involve that type of deep study, to be able to minister to them, you and I need to have deep thoughts about God. And it makes us more effective, doesn't it, as we minister to one another. So I want to leave you tonight with we're just going to go through 4 verses tonight, and I want to leave you with 3 pitfalls here of not listening to God and therefore not deepening my own faith. And when we speak about here deepening my faith, I'm not just talking about adding information to my faith. I remember a gentleman at Emmanuel used to come, and he would go through all the kings of Israel, all the kings of Judah. He knew how old everyone was, how long they reigned. Even when it listed their mom, he knew it. And that's good, but that's not what we're talking about. It's about knowing God. And I think the key, with the providence of God, as I think we're going to discover tonight, is having a confidence in the providence of God. So we go home tonight completely confident in what God is doing. Whether we understand it, whether we are aware of it or not. And here's the first pitfall, and I've actually just written them out in your notes there for you, but left some spots for some discussion. And when I read this, I want to ask you what you think about this statement. When we are perplexed about God's providence, and I'm talking here in a negative way, what God is doing, like Habakkuk is here, and we do not seek him, we begin to see things and events as fate and fortune, and not as coming from a wise and sovereign God. What do you think of that statement? Or could you explain that a little bit to us? Why would we begin to see things and events as fate and fortune?
Like they brought that upon themselves. Like maybe that culture or the like, I don't know, you kind of think of, I was trying to think of an example, I guess, when we were out there.
Yep.
But just wondering if maybe it's, they brought this upon themselves, almost as like a fate.
Yep. Okay. In spite of God, almost, I think, from the statement. Any other thoughts?
It's like not having a knowledge, an understanding of who God is and his providence. Just that big, that knowledge, that basic understanding.
Yep.
I just go to superstition.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, instead of having a knowledge, understanding of God, we sort of almost superstitious in our faith.
I think anytime we don't seek him, we can go off in all kinds of.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
When we seek him, we get to know his character, who he is, and then that is going to take us in the opposite direction of wrong.
Yes, okay,
The more
okay.
we know who
Yeah.
he is.
Getting to know God's character when we seek him. Is God sovereign tonight?
Yes.
Does God have a providential plan tonight?
Yes.
Parts of the world, all the world, everybody, every little, as R.C. Sproul would say, if that one little molecule falls without him being aware of it, he's not sovereign, control of everything that goes on. If we don't seek that and understand it to some degree, I think that's where the fate and fortune comes in here. We just start to think, oh, that's who they are, or that's who that country is, or that's going to happen over here, or yeah, I thought about that election, or without asking the question, like Habakkuk is here, what are you doing, God? Because you're doing something. When you're sovereign, you're in control of the universe. You're doing something. And if we don't understand that, then we view everything that goes on as just some kind of fate or fortune, and not that God's in control and working. Remember we said last week, if your next door neighbor is rich, God made him rich. So God is in charge of everything. And he is the one who's in control. Without seeing things come from God's hand, we begin to live and think like God is out of control. And somehow God has abandoned us. We're trying to do ministry in spite of God not doing anything. That's sometimes the way we sometimes wouldn't say that, but we ought not even go there. We ought to be a people who are extremely confident in what God is doing, whether we look at it and view it and say, God, that was dead on, right? Or we view it and say, Lord, what are you doing here? Or we might even look at it at times and really question almost what's happened, and Lord, how does that fit into your plan? Remember we said last week that we tend to think that God is asleep or inactive if we don't see something happening or if things are going wrong. And if God is supposedly asleep or inactive, what is our response? I'm going to do it. If God is inactive, we tend to take things in our own hands, and we're guilty of the big W word, worry. We worry about things when we don't have the confidence that God is doing what God does. Lord, if you're not going to work here, I will. And if God does not wrestle us, I think, to the ground, we begin to even battle sin on our own. We almost battle this as if God's not with us and helping us. And strangely enough, it's almost like we can live like Christians and in some ways almost act like God does not exist. And we don't want to be that way. We want to live with a confidence. You know, imagine if Christ came in here tonight and charged us and said, okay, for the next 5 years, this is what I want for Elam Bible Chapel. And I'm back in 5 years, see how you're making out. You could see how the motivation and confidence of us would just go through the roof, wouldn't it? That's really what God has done. He's challenged his churches. He's challenged his people. And we just don't have that day-to-day visual of God in the person of Christ, like we would if he was actually here with us. But in a sense, when we come to church desiring to see God, when we come to open our Bibles desiring to hear from God, in a sense we do. Because his challenge to us is vital. It's today. It's this is what I want you to do. And you need to be confident in what I am doing. Any thoughts or questions there?
The purpose of prayer is to align our will to God's, and we stop seeking and we stop trying to do that. If we have a choice, we're going to fall into figured fortune thinking,
Yes.
and even thinking that our way is far superior.
Yes.
Like if we could just have the reins.
Yeah, if we quit seeking God, yeah, our way becomes, doesn't it? Because, yeah, we're not really aware sometimes of what God's doing, or the excitement, I suppose, of what God is doing. We become servants of God almost on the wrong, we're on the wrong path sometimes. Okay, next one. The last two are similar, but I think we need to say both of them. When we are perplexed about God's providence, our tendency is to make prayer a duty and not a vital part of our Christianity. What do you think of that statement? When we are perplexed about God's providence, our tendency is to make prayer a duty and not a vital part of our Christianity. Let's start out here. What's prayer that's a duty? What's that look like?
Well, I'm not positive duty is necessarily bad for prayer.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if I tell Steve I'm going to pray for him
Yes.
every night for 2 weeks because he's going through a difficult time, then I think I've got a duty to pray.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Because I've told him I have to honor my word.
Yes.
Oftentimes we say, yeah,
Yep.
to people, we're going to pray for you, and then,
Yes.
we
Yeah.
don't. So I think to a certain extent there is a duty, but I understand the other aspect of it. If it's duty, it loses its passion if it's not connected with our connectedness with God.
Right.
Like if
Yes.
it's just out of a sense of obligation that we have to,
We have to pray for Steve.
yeah.
Only because we
Again.
promised.
Good duty.
Yeah, so if we're using the term duty in a negative sense, I suppose, right? Obligation as opposed to passionate. What does that look like, or what can it look like?
I think it's like not our heart's cry, that we're not going to God with like what's happening, and because we're not believing that He's in control of this, which is our duty, that we're like, hey, I should pray right now, but I don't want to, and it's not like, or, and because if we're connected to the Lord, like vertically we're there, then it's like, it's our heart, we're yearning, we're falling
Yeah.
to the speed with it.
Yeah. Yeah, Tess is saying here that without the connection with God, you're just praying your list or what you think you need to pray for, but without that connection with God where you're passionately praying to Him and believing that God's going to work here. And so you need to pray. It's when, Lord, give us a good day at church today. As opposed to a deep prayer, that would say, Lord, you need to be with us this morning in Elam. We need your spirit amongst our people. You need to work in the hearts of our young people. Those that we're praying where we believe that God is listening and that God is doing, as opposed to just the obligation of, prayed for church today, prayed that the sun would come out, prayed that I get all my chores done, right? Which in some ways, and this is not true, but you could almost say some of those things you don't even need God. You're just getting through them. But when you're praying passionately, it indicates that yes, we need God, because if anything's going to happen, whether it's a church or in your own life or someone you're praying for, if anything significant spiritually is going to happen, it requires God to act. And that's praying in believing in God's providence and that God is working. Any other thoughts there on that one?
I think any relationship we have that we value, I would hate the other person to think that it was a duty to talk to me.
Yeah.
Instead they wanted to talk.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, this is my duty today, dear. Yeah.
It'd be tempting to start thinking that if I do my duty, you hold up your end of the bargain and do
yes,
what you want,
right.
rather than
Yes,
I want what you want.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think we understand the difference here, right? And the difference is confidence in that God is working and God can do things. God can change the hearts of people. God can revive a church. Changes remarkably how we would come before the Lord. And then when you view back to things of just checking off a list, there's such a deadness there. And there's no strong confidence or belief that God can do something. Third one's similar, but I just think we need to listen to it. When we are perplexed about God's providence, we lose the joy of our Christianity. Therefore, living in anger, in insecurity, and without patience, confidence, and peace. What do I mean by that? When we are perplexed about God's providence, we lose the joy of our Christianity. Therefore, living in anger, in insecurity, without patience, confidence, and peace. What's your thoughts?
If we're not trusting that God is sovereign and in control of all things, when things go awry, we start pointing, blaming, putting it on ourselves. And I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes things are ourselves, but we start doing those things rather than trusting, even if things are going sideways, God's hand is in this, and what does He want me to learn? What does He want me to do?
Yes.
How do I consider it all joy and
Yeah.
move forward? So,
Yeah, if we serve a non-powerful God, it's really easy to get angry and insecure. Because we're actually Christians praying to someone that we don't really have a great confidence can do a whole lot. And it even brings, I think, even competition within the church. We start almost manipulating God, that my kids are better than your kids, type of thinking. And that could be, or my ministry is better than your ministry, because it's so human manufactured and not in the joy of God working within my family or your family, or God working within the church or in that particular ministry. Any other thoughts there? I wrote down, when we are perplexed about God's providence and lose the joy of our Christianity, I wrote down that Christianity can become a little ugly. It really can. It's like Christianity without real faith. It's just a lifestyle that does things without any power. I think we tend to draw quick conclusions about people when we live this way. We can get sarcastic. We can get sarcastic about events. And I've written here, we've tried to manufacture Christianity by making things happen. We sort of try to convince ourselves that God's working when He's not even working in what we think is happening. And so we try to convince ourselves, and we manipulate things so that we just believe that someone's changing or the church is doing well when it's not. We're not in tune with God, I suppose. Our hearts are, the church could be over here, or your family or your ministry, when God's working here, and we sort of pretend that we're right in the middle of God's will, and we're right in the middle of what God's doing, but we're not. And our prayers are not going to change that, because our prayers have absolutely zero confidence in what God could do if we prayed and people and our families in the church were brought under the sovereign command and pleasures of God. In our thoughts there.
I think it is possible to be 100% confident that God is providentially acting and yet be perplexed about what he's doing.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's probably healthy, I
Yeah.
think, isn't it? Yeah.
Because, as an example, some man loses his job for no fault of his own, just the job dries up. And you see the family suffering. It's hard to know what God is doing. You know that God is working and that there is going to be a outcome that pleases God.
Yes.
But in the meantime, as we're praying about the situation, understanding God as provident, what are we to do? Like, is God depriving them of this income to make them more dependent, or should we step in and help where things are? So there's a lot of complexity in situations that we know that God is at work in, but we don't know what he's doing and maybe what we're to do.
What we're to do.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You know, if you were in a tragic situation, who would you want to come beside you? Someone with confidence in God, or somebody that was basically just the words? We know the answer to that question. And we know the difference between that kind of ministry and sort of a word-only ministry without that heart and passion for God. What happens when we bypass all these steps of growth is that we miss God's conviction, his caution to us, his counsel to us, his comfort. In other words, though our faith, though it might know much biblical information, is really very spiritually shallow and very much inactive. Verse 2, "Then Yahweh answered me and said, write down the vision and write it on tablets distinctly, that the one who reads it may run." That's a comforting thought. God is going to respond, and when he speaks, he will speak clearly, and he tells Habakkuk to write this down. In other words, God tells Habakkuk the importance of what he's going to say so that it becomes a certainty to him. I'm sure there's been times in your lives, I know in my own life, when you've listened to somebody speak, or you've read something in a passage, or you've been in a Sunday school class, and that thought has stayed with you for a long time. It's been significant in your life, and I know that's true of my own life as well. Verse 3, "For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It pants towards its end, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, for it will certainly come. It will not delay." So what God is declaring here is coming, but he says to Habakkuk, but not now. I'm going to tell you what will happen to the Babylonians, but it won't take place yet. For I've appointed a time for everything that I do. And probably God could say here as well, it's not dependent upon you, Habakkuk. It's not dependent upon any man. It's dependent upon me and my decrees and my purposes. So that teaches us something, doesn't it, about significant things that we pray for. The timing is not dependent upon you. It's about my plans and my purposes. But the certainty of it is never in doubt. Be patient, for it will happen. My plans and purposes will never be in doubt. Remember, Habakkuk, that I have existed from eternity past. I will live into eternity future, and I will do what I will do. In my Bible, it says, verse 3, it pants toward its end, and it will not lie. If I'm sitting in our family room, all I have to do is just move my arm over. I don't know, Ted's, she's getting senile in her old age, but I just have to move my arm. She gets up, like she's, as if we're not going anywhere, Ted. I get from this verse, it pants towards its end, it will not lie. It's like it's ready to, what God has said is ready to go. But we don't know the time. And it's within God's time frame, but it's not within yours. Anybody other translation of that passage there in verse 3? It pants towards its end, and it will not lie. Somebody got something else?
It speaks of the end and will not prove false.
Okay, it speaks of the end, but it will not prove false. Is that right? Yeah. Anybody else?
Testifies about the end.
It testifies about the end, yes. I think NASB I got here, it hastens towards the goal, and it will not fail. So don't worry, you won't be disappointed, because it'll happen, and someday you will actually rejoice in what I do. Now, you and I as humans, we might promise something, and we may disappoint. There might be times when we never come through, or we may come through and do somewhat of a lousy job, but not with God. I want you to turn to Hebrews. Keep your finger there in Habakkuk, but let's go to Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. In verse 32. Hebrews 10, verse 32. But remember the former days when after being enlightened, you endured a great conflict of sufferings, partly by being made a public spectacle through reproaches and afflictions, and partly by becoming sharers with those who were so treated. For you also showed sympathy to the prisoners and accepted with joy the seizure of your possessions, knowing that you have for yourselves a better and lasting possession. Therefore, do not throw away that confidence of yours. See the situation, the horrendous situation they're in. And what does he tell them to do? Don't lose your confidence. Basically, don't lose your confidence in what God is doing, in spite of everything that's going on around about you. He says, which has great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. And then verse 37, for yet in a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. That last verse is actually a loose quoting there of Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 3. But I also want you to keep that thought here as we look at let's go back to Habakkuk verse 4, chapter 2. I want you to keep thought of that verse 35. Therefore, do not throw away that confidence of yours, which has great reward. And back to Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. It says, behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous will live by his faith. This message that the Lord has given will be ignored by many, and the reason it will be ignored is because it's not coming right away. And here in this verse 4, we get the contrast between, he talks here really about the saint and the sinner. The saint lives by faith, confidence in God and what God is going to do. The sinner's heart is not right within him. The saint trusts in God, whereas the sinner is proudful, trusts in himself. John MacArthur said this is the core of this whole book, and that is justification by faith. And he goes on to say this. He said, the emphasis of both Habakkuk and the New Testament references go beyond the act of faith to include the continuity of faith. Faith is not a one-time act, but it's a way of life. The true believer, declared righteous by God, will persevere in faith as the pattern of his life. You see the consistency here in a confidence in God. It's important when we speak to someone about salvation that we emphasize that faith now becomes a part of your life. It's the way that you now live. It's not just this one-time thing that happens. Your whole life here is changing. the desire, the message here of the Bible is when you come to Christ, your entire life now is that we would become people of faith for our whole lives. We often call ourselves Christians or believers, and rightly so. But we also, I thought we should think of ourselves as people of faith. And we should be known by that, by others. And when I say people of faith, that we would be viewed upon as people simply have a confidence in God. We have a faith in God that just exudes confidence from you and I. And therefore we live differently. Matthew Henry says that those whose hearts are right with God will keep close to the Lord throughout the most difficult times of their life. And so you go through something difficult with a confidence of God and being a person of faith. I can see why he's talking here that these are the same people that live close to the Lord even through the difficulties and the harsh times. And their lives continue to stay close to the Lord and draw closer to Him and become more dependent upon Him. Those whose hearts are right with God will keep close to the Lord throughout the most difficult times, and their lives will continue to draw closer to Him and will become more dependent upon Him. And this ties in so much with the Hebrews chapter 10 verse, therefore do not throw away that confidence of yours, which has great reward. That phrase, the just shall live by faith, is a phrase that rings throughout the scriptures, obviously, and rings again, I think it's about 4 times in the New Testament. Ronald Blue said that the phrase sort of located here in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 4, is almost an unusual spot that we would read this. We would expect to find it if we knew only the New Testament, and then we thought, where did this come from? And we'd think this is going to be a treasure somewhere, some deep theologian, and it's stuck here when Habakkuk is actually questioning God. Ronald Blue said that the phrase located here in Habakkuk, he says, sparkles like a diamond in a pile of soot. And it's located in a very strange location. And it's a truth that brings a future promise. The just shall live by faith. Faith, confidence in what God is doing. That it's not only a one time that I said I want to serve Christ. It's a change of life. It's a whole lifestyle. That every day, 9 o'clock every morning, this day I have confidence, no matter what, in what God is doing around us. And therefore my prayers become far more passionate, understanding that God can change. God can move in the hearts of people, the hearts of a church, and the hearts of a country. And that's what He wants us to do. And any questions or comments? Banyan's with me. Any thoughts? Okay, I'll give you some questions here tonight. Consider that phrase, live by faith, and discuss the character of those who live in such a consistent way. And then consider the man who is proud in verse 4. And describe his character. And I don't mean we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. I want you, what's he going to struggle with, really? The proud guy in verse 4 versus the one who lives by faith in verse 1. Let's look at it in an honest, kind, loving way. What's the difference in the thinking of those two if they're doing those two things? And then in question 3, discuss a time in your life when you were significantly challenged by God to reaffirm or readjust your right thinking. A time maybe when you sat in church or sat down with somebody or quietly were studying the Word of God, and there was something there that made a significant turn in your life, or just a reaffirming of something that you knew that you had to do, and discuss that amongst yourselves.